My name is Daniel, and this is the story of how my sister, Emily, disappeared 11 years ago playing a game we thought was just an urban legend. Emily was always the adventurous one between the two of us. She was the type of person who would climb the tallest trees, explore abandoned buildings, and seek out the spookiest places in town just for the thrill of it. I, on the other hand, was the cautious one, the one who made sure she never got into too much trouble. But there are some places you can't protect someone from, some games you shouldn't play. It all started on a summer evening in our small town where nothing ever seemed to happen. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by dense woods and old myths that had been passed down for generations. One of those myths was about a game called Eely Cave. According to the legend, Eely Cave wasn't a real cave, but a doorway hidden deep in the forest. It was said that if you followed the right path, under the right conditions, you would find an entrance, a dark, wet tunnel leading underground. The game was simple: go inside, follow the tunnels, and come back out before the cave swallowed you. The stories varied. Some said that those who failed were lost forever, others claimed they came back, different. Emily had heard the legend before, of course. Everyone in town had. But for her, it was a challenge. When our friend Mark mentioned that he had found the supposed entrance, Emily's eyes lit up with excitement. She had to see it for herself. I tried to talk her out of it, but she just laughed, calling me a scaredy cat. I told her there was a reason why no one in town ever went looking for it, but she wouldn't listen. That night, we packed some flashlights, a few snacks, and a notebook. Emily always carried a notebook whenever she went on her adventures, writing down details like a real explorer. If anything happens, at least there'll be a record, she joked. I didn't find it funny. The walk into the woods was eerily quiet. The deeper we went, the more unnatural everything felt. There was no wind, no rustling leaves, just the sound of our footsteps and the occasional hoot of an owl. Mark led the way, swearing that he had found the cave entrance just 2 nights before. The air grew damp, and an odd, briny smell filled our nostrils. It smelled like the ocean, which made no sense considering we were miles from the nearest body of water. Then we saw it. A small opening in the ground, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. The earth around it was black, as if scorched. I felt a chill run down my spine. Emily, of course, was ecstatic. She aimed her flashlight into the hole, but the beam seemed to vanish into the darkness. "It's deeper than it looks," she said. That was the first warning we ignored. Mark hesitated, but Emily didn't. She sat on the edge, legs dangling over the side. "Are you guys coming, or what?" She grinned before sliding inside. I felt something in my gut, a deep, instinctual fear. But I couldn't let her go alone. Taking a deep breath, I followed her in, with Mark right behind me. The descent was steeper than expected, the walls slick with moisture. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I heard something. A whisper? A breath? I turned to Mark, but he just shook his head. Maybe it was just my nerves. The tunnel opened into a narrow corridor, the walls covered in something slimy. The briny smell was stronger here, making my stomach turn. Emily led the way, marking the walls with chalk as we moved forward. She was fearless, or maybe just reckless. I wasn't sure anymore. As we ventured deeper, the tunnel seemed to breathe. The air pulsed, like a living thing. The ground beneath us was soft, almost like wet sand. And then, we heard it, a low, echoing sound, like something moving in the distance. It wasn't water. It wasn't wind. It was something else. Emily turned to me, excitement in her eyes. "This is amazing," she whispered. I wasn't so sure. And then we saw the first set of footprints, not ours. Something else had been here. Something else was still here. That was the second warning we ignored. The realization that we were not alone sent a chill down my spine. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the footprints ahead. They were fresh, pressed into the damp ground of the cave. "Dies," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the distant dripping of water. "We should turn back." Emily scoffed, brushing past me. "Are you kidding? This is incredible. This means someone else has been here recently. We might not be the first, but we could be the first to tell the story. Mark hesitated, his flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. Or it means we're not alone. And whatever made these prints could still be here. A tense silence fell between us. The briny smell in the air grew thicker, more suffocating. The walls of the cave seemed to pulse like a living thing, as if they were breathing in unison with our own rapid breaths. Emily pressed on, her determination unshaken. I didn't want to follow, but the idea of leaving her down here alone was worse than my fear. Mark and I exchanged a glance before trailing behind her. The tunnel twisted and turned, growing narrower the deeper we went. At some points, we had to crouch, squeezing through tight spaces that left our clothes soaked from the condensation on the walls. The silence became oppressive, the only sounds our own movements and the distant, eerie echoes of something unseen. And then we heard it. A wet slithering sound, faint but unmistakable. Emily stopped abruptly. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah," Mark said, his voice tight with fear. "I definitely heard that." I swallowed hard. "We need to leave. Now." But before we could even turn around, a sudden gust of cold air rushed past us, carrying with it an unmistakable whisper. Not words, but something guttural and ancient. Something that didn't belong in our world. The tunnel trembled. The ground beneath us seemed to shift, as if something massive was stirring deep below. The flashlight beams flickered wildly, shadows stretching unnaturally against the damp rock walls. Then, out of the darkness, something moved. A shape, long, sinuous, and almost translucent, glided just beyond the reach of our lights. It moved with an eerie grace, its form shifting as though it were made of liquid and shadow. My stomach twisted in horror. Emily, for the first time, hesitated. What the hell was that? Mark's voice cracked, his body rigid with fear. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she raised her flashlight, aiming the beam ahead. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, but something had changed. The walls were no longer solid rock, but something else. Something slick and veined, pulsating as if alive. "We need to go back," I said, grabbing Emily's wrist. She didn't resist. But the tunnel behind us was no longer the way we had come. The path was gone, replaced by a wall of black, glistening flesh. Panic seized my chest. No, no, no. This isn't possible. Mark pressed his hands against the surface, but it felt soft, like wet skin. The realization hit all of us at once. We were trapped. Then, from the depths of the cave, the whispering returned, closer this time. And the game had truly begun. Panic set in. I slammed my fists against the glistening black wall that had replaced the tunnel behind us. The soft, wet surface gave slightly under my touch, as if it were breathing, alive. My heart pounded as I turned to Emily and Mark, who stood frozen, their faces pale with fear. "This isn't real," Mark muttered. "This can't be real." Emily, for once, had no words. Her fingers clenched around the flashlight, the beam shaking as it swept over the pulsating walls. The cave had transformed around us. The rough stone we had entered through was gone, replaced with a smooth, undulating darkness that smelled of salt and decay. And then we heard it again, the whispering. It came from the depths of the tunnel ahead, a layered, wet murmuring that sounded almost human. Almost. But there was something wrong about it, something hollow and hungry. "We need to move," I whispered. "Standing still won't help us." Emily took a deep breath and nodded. "We keep going. There has to be another way out." Reluctantly, Mark and I followed. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder, thicker. Our breaths came out in visible puffs. The ground beneath us felt different now, not rock, but something softer, like damp sand or flesh. As we walked, the whispers grew louder. At first, they seemed distant, but soon they were all around us, echoing through the darkness. My skin crawled as I realized they weren't just whispers. They were voices, calling our names. I grabbed Emily's wrist. "Did you hear that?" She didn't answer. Her face had gone white, her flashlight fixed on something ahead. Mark swore under his breath and stumbled back. I turned, and my stomach dropped. There, in the middle of the tunnel, stood a figure. It was barely human, its form shifting, its limbs too long, too thin. Its face was a smooth expanse of darkness, yet I felt its gaze, heavy and piercing. The whispers swirled around it, pouring from its body like a chorus of unseen mouths. Then it moved. Not walked, moved. As if it were gliding, its shape bending and stretching unnaturally. Every instinct in my body screamed to run. Emily reacted first. She grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. Go! Now! We turned and sprinted. The tunnel twisted and shifted, the walls seeming to close in. My lungs burned as I ran, the air thick with the stench of rotting seawater. The whispers rose to a deafening cacophony. And then, the ground beneath us disappeared. I fell. The air rushed past me, the darkness swallowing everything. My stomach lurched as I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my body. My flashlight flickered, rolling out of reach. Emily. Mark. I called, my voice hoarse. A groan came from nearby. I'm here, Emily coughed. I think I hit my arm. Mark? I called again. Silence. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it wildly around. Emily was a few feet away, clutching her arm, but Mark was gone. The whispers had stopped. The air felt different now, thick with something unseen. And then I saw it, just at the edge of the light. Something was dragging Mark into the darkness. I lunged forward, but Emily grabbed me. No, we can't. A sound erupted from the tunnel, something between a shriek and a gurgle. The walls trembled, the floor shifting beneath us. And then, the thing that had taken Mark began to turn. Slowly. Toward us. And the game was not over yet. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that Mark was gone or the thing that had taken him. The darkness around us seemed to throb with an eerie life of its own, as if it could sense our fear. My breath came in shallow gasps as I pulled Emily to her feet, her arms still clutching her injured shoulder. She winced with every movement, but there was no time to stop and assess the damage. We have to get out of here, I said, my voice hoarse. It was the only thing I could think to say, but deep down, I knew it was pointless. There was no way out. Not anymore. Emily's eyes were wide with terror, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Mark. He was just here. Her voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse under the weight of it. I glanced back toward the shadows where Mark had been dragged. The passage beyond was empty, but the silence in its wake was suffocating. No more whispers. No more sounds of movement. Just the oppressive, thick air that hung around us like a cloud. Then it came again. A low, guttural sound, closer this time. The walls of the cave shuddered as the thing that had taken Mark drew nearer, its presence like a dark, suffocating wave washing over us. I didn't dare turn to look, but I felt it. The weight of its gaze, like invisible fingers gripping my skin, pulling at me from all directions. Emily squeezed my hand. We can't outrun it, she whispered, her voice strained but steady. We have to do something else. We need to play the game. I looked at her, confusion and fear mingling in my chest. What are you talking about? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the dark passage ahead, her expression distant, like she was lost in thought. The game, the legend. You heard the stories. The ones who return, they never do so unchanged. They survive, but they... She trailed off, biting her lip. They have to finish it. They have to pay the price. My stomach turned as I pieced it together. The game was never just a game. It wasn't about bravery or adventure, it was about something far worse. Something far darker. It was about sacrifice. We have to give something, Emily continued, her voice almost too calm, as if she had already accepted the inevitable. A life for a life. Emily, I whispered, unable to comprehend what she was suggesting. My blood ran cold. No, we can't just. But she was already moving, her feet slipping against the slick, damp ground as she stepped forward. I have to. It's the only way to end it. To save us. I reached for her, panic clawing at my chest. Don't. But she was gone, swallowed by the shadows before I could stop her. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't just let her. No, I wouldn't. The thought of losing her, of this being the end of her, tore me apart. I didn't care what the legend said. I didn't care about the game or whatever dark force lay in this cursed place. I wasn't going to let her die. I ran after her, my mind frantic with thoughts of saving her. The passage twisted and turned in unnatural ways, the walls shifting with each step I took. It was as if the cave itself was alive and hungry. I couldn't hear Emily anymore, and I feared she had already gone too far. Then I saw it. The figure, tall, thin, and horrifying. It stood at the far end of the passage, surrounded by an eerie glow. Its face was a black void, smooth and featureless, but somehow I could feel it staring at me. The whispers returned, louder now, drowning out all rational thought. They were calling my name, calling Emily's name, calling us both to the abyss. I stopped dead in my tracks, a wave of nausea washing over me. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Emily! I screamed, my voice breaking. You don't have to do this. The figure didn't move. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the ground tremble beneath me. And then, from the darkness, Emily's voice reached me, a whisper, soft and distant. Daniel, it's too late. I turned to find her standing behind me, her eyes glazed, her body rigid as if she were no longer in control. The game had claimed her. She had made her choice, and now there was no going back. Emily! I cried again, my hands trembling as I reached for her. You're not. But she was already gone. The thing that had taken Mark and now had Emily, it was waiting for me, too. It was the price we had to pay. The game was not just about survival, it was about submission. And I realized too late that the game had never ended. The game had only just begun. 11 years. It had been 11 years since Emily disappeared into the darkness of Eely Cave. 11 years of searching, of unanswered questions, of a gnawing emptiness that hollowed out my every day. I had searched high and low, followed every lead, every whisper, but the cave had swallowed her whole. There was no trace. No body. Nothing. And now, I was standing at the mouth of that same cave again. I hadn't planned on returning. The memories of that night, of the fear, the whispers, the darkness, had haunted me enough. But something had changed. A feeling I couldn't shake. A pull. As if the cave itself had been calling me, beckoning me to finish the game I had failed to play when Emily vanished. I took a shaky breath and stepped forward. The air was thick with dampness, the briny smell that had once chilled me to the bone now somehow familiar. The entrance was exactly as I remembered it, small, dark, and swallowed by the forest. The memories of Emily's excited voice, her reckless smile, flashed before me, and for a moment, I thought I might be able to hear her laugh again. But there was nothing. Just silence. I had to do this. For Emily. To understand what had happened to her. To understand the price of the game. The darkness swallowed me once more as I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the pitch black. The walls felt colder than they should have, almost as though they were alive, pulsing with some unseen force. I walked deeper, following the winding path I had taken so many years ago, the feeling of dread tightening around my chest with every step. The whispers started almost immediately. At first, they were soft, distant, like echoes from the past. But as I pressed on, they grew louder, clearer, calling my name. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I tried to shake off the fear. I had come here to face it, to face what had happened to Emily. the cave wouldn't take me to. I wouldn't let it. And then, as I rounded a bend in the tunnel, I saw her. Emily. I froze. She was standing at the end of the corridor, bathed in a pale, unnatural light. Her hair, once messy and wild, was now smooth and strangely immaculate. Her clothes, the ones she had worn that night, were tattered and aged, as if time itself had been around her. But it was her face that stopped me in my tracks. Her eyes, those eyes, were empty. Void. Like black holes staring back at me. Emily? I whispered, my voice trembling. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, the air around me growing heavier. She didn't respond. Her head tilted slightly to one side, as if studying me, but she didn't speak. There was something unnatural in her stillness, something hollow about the way she stood there. Emily, what happened to you? I asked, taking another step, my voice breaking. Where have you been? What happened in the cave? Her lips parted, but it wasn't her voice that answered me. It was the same guttural whisper I had heard years ago, the one that filled the cave, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. You should have played the game. The words echoed in the silence, and I could feel them sinking deep into my chest. The game. It wasn't just a game. It was never just a game. Emily's expression remained unchanged, but her body seemed to twitch, as though her form was unraveling in the flickering light. The shadows that clung to the walls began to stretch and shift, creeping toward her like they were alive. No, I don't understand, I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. What is this? What are you? For the first time, she spoke, not with her mouth, but through the air itself. Her voice was like 1,000 whispers, layered and distorted, as if it were not truly her anymore. I am the price, she said, her tone cold and distant, like she was speaking through a veil. I am what was left behind. What was taken. What must be given in exchange. A shiver ran down my spine. The words didn't make sense, but I knew. I understood. The cave had taken Emily, and it had given her back, changed, twisted. And now it had come for me. A sudden realization hit me like a blow to the chest. The price wasn't just a life. It was more than that. It was the soul, the essence, the very thing that made us who we were. You, I whispered, my voice cracking. You were never meant to come back. You changed. Emily didn't answer. Instead, her gaze hardened, the emptiness in her eyes deepening. Her body began to shimmer and distort, her form flickering like a broken reflection in a shattered mirror. I could feel it then, the darkness that surrounded her, pulling me in, threatening to swallow me whole. You should have played the game, Daniel, the voice repeated, louder now, more insistent. You didn't finish it. You didn't pay the price. The walls of the cave began to close in on me, the passage shrinking, the air becoming thick and suffocating. Emily's figure flickered once more, and then, just like that, she was gone. Vanished into the darkness as if she had never been there at all. But her voice lingered, echoing through the cave. Finish the game, Daniel. Or become the price. And then, the whisper stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. The air was thick with an unnatural weight, and I stood there, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest. The game had never been about winning. It had never been about surviving. It was about the price. A price I hadn't understood until it was too late. I had lost her. I had lost Emily. And now, the game had come full circle. I was the next sacrifice.